All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. And tonight we're going to read another sutra. We are moving right along in the Digha Nikāya, the Majjhima Nikāya, the middle length discourses. We're moving right along. We're moving on to Sutta number 89, the Dhammacetiya Sutta, what they're calling monuments to the Dharma. So that's the sutta for tonight. Just a quick reminder, we are still in the little section of 10 little sutras, and this is the Rajavagga section, all of these little teachings that the Buddha gave to these, either teachings that he gave to kings, rajas, or kings figure in them in some way. It's the through line of all these sutras. And the last number of sutras, or at least a number of them in this collection, have been focused on King Pasenadi, or King Prasenajit, as he's called in Sanskrit. And tonight, we're going to keep going. In fact, tonight and next week's sutras, so the last one in the collection, they're both to King Prasenajit. So, um, so that's the connection to last week. It's the connection to the sutras that we've been working on. And like I've been saying about a lot of the sutras in this particular collection, this is a really great sutra tonight. I was very excited to find this one. I have a lot of like little things to share with you about it. Um, I mean, it's a great sutra just on its own merit, but it's one of those ones where it it's gonna give us a lot to think about in terms of other sutras in that way. So it's a very interesting sutra if you're interested in sutras in general. So. Yeah, let's just go ahead and dive in. Yeah, so this is Sutta 89, the Dhammacetiya Sutta. By the way, just so that you know from the beginning, even though it's not going to come up till the end, a Chetya. So this sutra is called the Dharma Chetya, the monuments to the Dharma. Well, a Chetya, the word Chetya, it kind of literally means a pile or like a mound. And so what we're actually talking about, the word Chetya is usually also sometimes translated or even called a stupa. So this is that if you've seen in India, those memorial mounds, they're called, they'll be like a giant kind of like half dome mound of earth, and it'll usually have like a protrudence at the top. So that's a Chetya in that way. But tonight's interesting in terms of what the Chetya is. So let's find out. So here we go. Sutta 89. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country, where there was a town of the Sakyans named Medalumpia or Medalumpa. Now, on that occasion, King Pasenadi of Kosala had arrived at Nagararaka, or just like village town, I believe is what that translates to. So King Prasenadi of Kosala had arrived at Nagaraka for some business or another, and then he addressed Digha Karanya. Digha Karanya is his commander-in-chief, head of his army. Then the king addressed Digha Karanya. Dear Karayanya, have the state carriages prepared. Let us go to the pleasure garden to see a pleasing spot. Yes, sir, Digha Karayanya replied. And when the state carriages were prepared, he informed the king, Sire, the state carriages are ready for you. You may go at your own convenience." Then King Pasenadi mounted a state carriage, and accompanied by other carriages, he drove out from Nagaraka with the full pomp of royalty and proceeded towards the park. He went thus as far as the road was passable for carriages, and then dismounted from his carriage, and he entered the park on foot. As he walked and wandered in the park for exercise, King Pasenadi saw roots of trees that were lovely and inspiring, quiet and undisturbed by voices, with an atmosphere of seclusion, remote from people, favorable for retreat. The sight of these reminded him of the Blessed One thus: "These roots of trees are lovely and inspiring, quiet and undisturbed by voices, with an atmosphere of seclusion, remote from people, favorable for retreat, like the places where we used to pay respect to the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." Then he told Dikkakariyanya what he had thought, and he asked, "Where is he living now, the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened?" "Oh, there is, sire, a town of Sakyans named Medalumpa. The Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened, is now living there." "How far is it from Nagaraka to Medalumpa?" "Oh, it's not far. 3 yojanas, about 20 miles. There's still daylight enough to get there." "Then, dear Karayanya, have the state carriages prepared. Let us go and see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." "Yes, sire," he replied. And when the state carriages were prepared, he informed the king, "Sire, the state carriages are ready for you. You may go at your convenience." Then King Pasenadi mounted a state carriage, and accompanied by the other carriages, he set out from Nagaraka towards the Sakyan town of Medalumpa. He arrived there while it was still daylight, and proceeded towards the park. He went thus as far as the road was passable for carriages, and then he dismounted from his carriage and entered the park on foot. Now, on that occasion, a number of bhikkhus were walking up and down in the open. Then King Pasenadi went to them and asked, "Venerable sirs, where is he living now, the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened? We want to see the Blessed One, accomplished and fully enlightened." "That is his dwelling there, great king, with the closed door. Go up to it quietly, without hurrying. Enter the porch, clear your throat, and tap on the panel. The Blessed One will open the door for you." King Pasenadi handed over his sword and turban to Dikkakariyanya right then and there. But then Dikkakariyanya thought, "So the king's like going into private session now, and I have to wait here alone?" Without hurrying, King Pasenadi went quietly up to the dwelling with the closed door, entered the porch, cleared his throat, and tapped on the panel, and the Blessed One opened the door. Then King Pasenadi entered the dwelling, prostrating himself with his head at the Blessed One's feet. He covered the Blessed One's feet with kisses and caressed them with his hands, pronouncing his name, saying, "I'm King Pasenadi of Kosala, venerable sir. I'm King Pasenadi of Kosala, venerable sir." And the Buddha replied, "But, great king, what reason do you see for doing such supreme honor to this body and for showing such friendship. And then the king's going to start by saying, Venerable Sir, I infer, according to the Dharma about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples are practicing the good way. All right, so let's just pause for a moment to take stock of what's going on here. So that's the setup for the sutra. And right away, what we want to notice is that there's something very interesting about this sutra. And what it is, I mean, there's a lot going on already, but in terms of like the structure of the sutra, what we want to notice is that usually, of course, it's somebody coming to ask the Buddha a question, and then the Buddha is going to give an answer. But in this sutra, it's reversed. The Buddha has actually asked the king, why are you revering this body? Why are you being so nice to me? And the king responds, first off, he says, well, it's because I infer, this is the language that he's going to keep using throughout the sutra. He's going to keep using this language of, sorry, I infer according to the Dharma. And what do I infer? What do I presume? What am I thinking about the Blessed One? Well, I'm thinking that the Blessed One, I'm thinking you, Buddha, are fully enlightened. The Dharma that you teach is well proclaimed, and that your followers, the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples, what they're practicing is good. And then the rest of the sutra is going to be the king explaining why he thinks that. Why does he think the Buddha is enlightened? Why does he think the Dharma is well proclaimed? Why does he think that what the Sangha is doing is good? So it's just going to be important or interesting to notice that this is it's another one of these kind of weird sutras where the teaching's not exactly coming from the Buddha, and now it's not even coming from like Ananda or Shariputra or from some, authority in that way. So, any questions about the setup? You could get pretty wild if you wanted to with the whole like he was behind the closed door and you clear your throat. By the way, I have noticed in Mahayana Buddhist sutras that they do use a kind of or I've seen references to the clearing of the throat before. And this is the first time I've found that reference in the Pali Canon, like in the early suttas. So is this the original reference? Maybe. I don't think we should read too much into all of that, like the locked door or being behind a closed door. The one thing that I think we do need to pay attention to, though, my feeling about a sutra like this is one of those let's go see the Buddha sutras, right? And so there's this like you might even call it a preamble, but the introduction to the sutra is this kind of build up of like, ooh, we should, originally the king goes to a pleasure garden and he sees a beautiful tree basically that reminds him of the Buddha. It's quiet, it's secluded, and he's like, this reminds me of the Buddha. Let's go see the Buddha. And so there's a kind of drama, right, or a dramaturgy to this, let's go see the Buddha. But as you know, if you've been coming to Dharma doors, I don't exactly like to read these as historical documents. And so I kind of read it as like, all right, reader, get ready to hear from the Buddha. Get ready to meet the Buddha. Get ready to hear some Dharma. So That's how I read the beginning of that. Oh, and actually, I should mention this now that I've taken a break in the action. The commander in chief, Kariyanya. So that little exchange there, there's some footnotes, especially in the Wisdom edition. There's some footnotes there regarding Diga Kariyanya, the commander in chief. So the backstory is that basically King Pasenadi he's been conferring with the Buddha, and not everybody's super excited about the king being so buddy-buddy with the Buddha. In particular, Karayanya, the commander-in-chief, because apparently shortly after the king saw the Buddha, the king had Karayanya's uncle arrested along with, they say, 32 of his family members. And I think they were like plotting to take over the throne or something like that. And so the king had them arrested. Anyways, the backstory is that there's tension between the commander-in-chief Karyanya and King Pasenadi. So when King Pasenadi's like, here, hold my stuff, I'm gonna go have a private secret meeting with the Buddha. Karyanya's like, you're gonna do what now? And I'm just supposed to wait here? Now the backstory, the footnotes are that Dika Karyanya, he doesn't just wait. The backstory is that he's so mad at the king for basically shutting him out of the meeting with the Buddha that the commander in chief Karyanya goes running back to the capital, goes running back to the palace, and basically stages a coup with the king's son. And we heard about the king's son. I forget his name, but we heard about him in a few other sutras. So, anyways, that's kind of the backstory that's going on here. And this is a time where I think the backstory is actually kind of important to know in order to sort of interpret or understand the sutra. So, so that's why he was so annoyed by that. All right. Ready to hear about why the king holds the Dharma in such high esteem? All right. So I'm down on section number 10, bottom of page 729. So once again, the refrain of the sutra is, well, I infer according to the Dharma about the Blessed One. I infer that the Blessed One's fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. Now, Venerable Sir, now remember, this is the king saying to the Buddha, and he's saying, Buddha, you know, I see some recluses and Brahmins, and I see them leading a limited, holy life. You know, maybe for 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or even 40 years. But then, on a later occasion, I see those same people all well groomed, well anointed with trimmed hair and trimmed beards, enjoying themselves, provided and endowed with the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. But here I see bhikkhus leading the perfect and pure holy life as long as life and breath last. Indeed, I do not see any other holy life elsewhere as perfect and pure as this. This is why, Venerable Sir, I infer according to the Dharma about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. All right. So by my calculation, the king is going to give us 9 reasons why he thinks the Buddha's enlightened, the Dharma's well proclaimed, and that the Sangha is practicing the good way. And the first one he says, if you didn't catch it, the first one he says, well, I see other people from like other traditions, and they practice for a little while. They practice for 10, 20 years or so, but then they give up, apparently, and they go back to having, their nice hair and their ointments and their nice clothing. And he's like, but your followers, they're in it for life. Like as soon as they join, they're in it for life. And we read another sutta a while ago where somebody said something similar, and it was about how even when people do leave, they know they've made a mistake. Like they don't leave because they think it's a waste of time. They leave because it's like difficult, but they don't leave thinking that they're not pursuing the right way. So we've seen this sentiment before in the suttas about how the Sangha of the Buddha is like solid. And the people that join, they join forever. And even if they leave, they don't like leave out of like animosity. So that's the first thing that the king is impressed by, right? So now you might not have caught it, but there was something else in that one. I'm not going to mention it right now, but I just want you to know that there's something important that happened in the king recalling that. But let's go on and then I'll tell you later. So, number 2. Again, Venerable Sir, the king says to the Buddha, you know, kings quarrel with kings. Nobles quarrel with nobles. Brahmins fight with Brahmins. Householders quarrel with householders. Mothers quarrel with sons. Sons quarrel with mothers. Fathers quarrel with sons. Sons quarrel with fathers. Brothers quarrel with their brothers. Brothers quarrel with sisters. Sisters quarrel with brothers. And friends quarrel with friends. But here, I see bhikkhus living in accord, living in concord, with mutual appreciation for one another, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes. I do not see any other assembly elsewhere with such concord. This too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. So, we've seen this before too in that way, but this beautiful language, right, of looking at each other, viewing each other with kindly eyes, right? So this idea that when the king sees all the bhikkhus, they don't argue, they don't quarrel, they don't fight, they blend like milk and water, right? So if you didn't catch it at the first one and you didn't catch it this one, I'm going to mention it now, but this sutra was very exciting for me because I really I didn't really take any I didn't think about the title. I was just like, oh, Dhammacetiya, Monuments of the Dharma. Okay. And I started, this was after Dharma Doors last week. So I'm reading the sutra and I'm like, oh, there's an interesting sutra about King Pasenadi. But then when you get to the line about without disputing, blending like milk and water. And if you've read a lot of suttas, you would immediately recognize, like, wait a minute, he's quoting Dharma. And that's the secret is actually, even in the first one, this idea of I do not see any holy life elsewhere as more perfect or pure. That's also verbatim out of the sutras. So we want to start to notice that the king is not just telling the Buddha why he thinks the Buddha and Buddhism is so cool. He's actually sort of quoting the Dharma. He's quoting from the sutras. All right. And so the first one is about how everybody sticks to it. And the second one is about how the Sangha doesn't quarrel. Number 3. Again, Venerable Sir, I've walked and wandered from park to park and from garden to garden. There, I've seen some recluses and Brahmins who are skinny, lean, wretched, unsightly, jaundiced, with veins standing out of their limbs, such that people would not want to look at them again. And I've thought, surely these venerable ones are leading the holy life in discontent. Or maybe they have some evil deed that they're concealing, or that they're so lean and wretched as they are. Such people that you wouldn't even want to look at them again. And I went up to them and I asked, why are you venerable ones so skinny and lean, and so wretched and unsightly and jaundiced with veins standing out of your limbs, such that people wouldn't even want to look at you again? And their reply was, it's in our genes. Well, the text says, their reply is, it's our family sickness. Could potentially read that as them saying it's in our genes. But their reply is, oh, it's our family sickness, great king. The king, though, he says to the Buddha, but here I see bhikkhus smiling and cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting, their faculties fresh, living at ease, unruffled, subsisting on what others give, abiding with a mind as aloof as a wild deer's. And I have thought, surely these venerable ones perceive successive states of lofty distinction in the Blessed One's dispensation, since they abide thus, smiling and cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting, their faculties fresh, living at ease, unruffled, some subsisting on what others give, abiding with a mind as aloof as a wild deer. This too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma, about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One's fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. All right. So that one, for me, this one is very, very high on the list of things that are important about Buddha Dharma. And, by the way, this is sort of this has always been a part of the tradition, and you can go all the way back to the very, very first teaching of the Buddha, the Turning the Dharma Wheel Sutra, where the Buddha lays out what he calls the Madhyamika, the middle path. And he says that this middle path that he's found, that he's discovered, he says, well, it's a middle path between extremes, such as, for example, he says, the extremes of self-gratification and self-mortification. And so the Buddha was addressing, in that very first sutra, he was addressing the fact that there's a lot of ascetic, yogic meditation traditions that are about self-mortification, fasting, starvation, austerities, those types of things. And that's what the king was referring to. He's like, I see some recluses and Brahmins, they don't look so good. Right? It's like, I don't know what they're doing, but they don't look so good. But when I see the bhikkhus, they're smiling, they're cheerful, they're sincerely joyful, right? Their faculties are fresh, they live at ease, they're unruffled, right? And they abide with minds aloof like wild deer. So this is sort of, almost my mission in life has become this, like, you've heard me say it before. Buddhism wants you to be having a much better time than you're having. You're really we all are causing ourselves a tremendous amount of suffering. And so Buddhism is truly about joy, cheer, smiling, all of that. And it's one of the reasons why the king thinks that the Buddha's enlightened. It's why he thinks the Dharma is well proclaimed and why what the bhikkhus is doing is good. Why? Because they look good. They look like they're having a good time. So I'm all for it. By the way, a bit of language that I'd like to clarify. It got a little complicated right there for a second. So the king says, yeah, I see these other uh, practitioners. They don't look so good. But I see the bhikkhus and they look great. And he says, and I have this thought about them. Surely these venerable ones perceive successive states of lofty distinction in the Blessed One's dispensation, since they abide thus, smiling and cheerful and all of that. So that language, perceiving successive states of lofty distinction in the Blessed One's dispensation, a very technical phrasing there, but they're basically referring to the jhana practice. The successive states of lofty distinction are the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. Those are the successive states of lofty distinction. And so he's saying, when he sees them so joyful, cheerful, and smiling, he thinks clearly it must be all the meditation. Clearly, these venerable ones have done the meditation that the Buddha's prescribed. That's why they must be so happy and joyful and so on. So, and by the way, that's going to be kind of sort of relevant in a moment that the king or the text has introduced the practice of the jhanas in that way. So, all right, that's number 3. Feeling okay? Nice. So this is question 4 here. This is where things start to get interesting. Like if you really want to like start digging into the sutra of like what's this sutra really all about? This one gets interesting. So the king says to the Buddha, again, Venerable Sir, being a crown or head anointed noble king. So a head anointed means abhisheka. That's the technical Sanskrit fancy Buddhist word for the crown anointing consecration of a king. So he says, being a head anointed noble king, I'm able to have executed those who should be executed. I'm able to fine those who should be fined. I'm able to ban or exile those that should be exiled. Yet, when I'm sitting in council, these people, they break in and they interrupt me. And though I say, gentlemen, don't break in and interrupt me when I'm sitting in council, wait till the end of my speech. They still break in and interrupt me. But here I see the bhikkhus while the Blessed One is teaching the Dharma to an assembly of several hundred followers. And then there's not even the sound of a disciple of the Blessed One coughing or clearing their throat. Once, the Blessed One was teaching the Dharma to an assembly of several hundred followers, and there, a disciple of his just cleared his throat. And thereupon, one of his companions in the holy life nudged him with his knee to indicate, "Be quiet, Venerable Sir, make no noise. The Blessed One, the teacher, is teaching us the Dharma." And I thought to myself, says the king, it is wonderful. It's marvelous how an assembly can be so well disciplined without force or weapon. Indeed, I do not see any other assembly elsewhere that is so well disciplined. This too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma, about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. So, on the one hand, the king is saying, yeah, I'm so impressed by your followers because they don't interrupt you. They don't even make a noise when you're teaching. So that's why the king reveres the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But there's kind of another, it's kind of the background story of this sutra going on, where the king sounds a little like pissed off that he's being interrupted by these people and that he's not getting this respect in that way. So that the king not being respected by his followers or by his underlings in that way, we're going to want to pay attention to that because that's going to kind of become again part of the background story of the sutra. But then we also at this point, I think we should remember or I think this would be a good time to reflect on the message, or at least one of the messages that we've been seeing in these Rajavagga sutras. And what I mean is that we've noticed that when these sutras that are about the king, this started with the very first one, where it was about our lowly pot maker. But the Buddha said, oh yeah, he's my number one supporter. Even though the king, I forget which king it was, but even though the king thought he was like a big supporter of the Buddha, and that was like pretty radical for the Buddha to be saying, oh yeah, my lowly pot maker supporter is higher than you. Well, the same thing's basically going on in this sutra, where the king is a head anointed king. He can have people executed. He has so much power. But does he though? Right? Because it would seem that the Buddha has a lot more kind of power. And then you might have caught the fact that this sutra references the Angulimala Sutra. And Angulimala, the guy with the necklace of fingers, if you remember, that was a King Prasanajit sutra. So this is what I mean by each one of the king's sections, he's referencing a different sutra. In fact, this week I was going to make an attempt to find all of the references, but I didn't have time. That would be a lot of Dharma research there. But I am here to tell you that this is definitely a reference to Angulimala Sutta, though. All right, so we get that reference to this idea of like, wow, they're so well disciplined, and you don't use any force or weapons. Like they just respect you. Wow. All right. So that's number 4. Number 5. Again, Venerable Sir, I have seen certain learned kshatriyas. So they say learned nobles, but we know the Kshatriyas are one of the castes, right? The Brahmins, and then the Kshatriyas, and then the Vaishyas, and then the Shudras. So the Kshatriyas, the kind of warrior class or political class. So the king says to the Buddha, you know, I've seen certain learned, smart Kshatriyas who are clever, knowledgeable about the doctrines of others, as sharp as hair-splitting marksmen, and they wander about, as it were, demolishing the views of others with their sharp wit. And when they hear the recluse Gautama will visit such and such a village or town, they formulate a question like this. We will go to the recluse Gautama and ask him this question. If he is asked like this, he will answer like this. And so we will refute him like this. And if he is asked like that, he will answer like that. And so we will refute his doctrine in that way. And then they hear the recluse Gautama has come to visit such and such a village or town. And these wise noblemen, they go to the Blessed One. And the Blessed One instructs, urges, rouses, and gladdens them with talk on the Dharma. After they've been instructed, urged, roused, and gladdened by the Blessed One with a talk on the Dharma, they don't so much as even ask him a question. So how could they refute his doctrine? In actual fact, they become his disciples. This too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma, about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. Again, Venerable Sir, I've even seen certain learned Brahmins who are clever, knowledgeable about the doctrines of others, as sharp as hair-splitting marksmen, and they wander about, as it were, demolishing the views of others with their sharp wit. And when they hear that the recluse Gautama will visit such and such a town or village, they formulate a question thus. We will go to the recluse Gautama to ask him this question. If he's asked like this, he will answer like this, and so we will refute his doctrine in this way. And if he is asked like that, he will answer like that, and so we will refute his doctrine in that way. And then they hear that the recluse Gautama has come to visit such and such a village or town. And they go to the Blessed One, and the Blessed One instructs them, urges, rouses, and gladdens them with a talk on the Dharma. After those learned Brahmins have been instructed, urged, roused, and gladdened by the Blessed One with a talk on the Dharma, they do not so much as ask him the question. So how should they refute his doctrine? In actual fact, they become his disciples. And this too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma, about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One's fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. And again, Venerable Sir, I have seen certain learned householders who are clever, knowledgeable about the doctrines of others, as sharp as hair-splitting marksmen, and they wander about, as it were, demolishing the views of others with their sharp wit. And when they hear that the recluse Gautama will visit such and such a town or village, they formulate a question thus. We will go to the recluse Gautama and ask him this question. If he's asked like this, he will answer like this, and so we will refute his doctrine in this way. And if he's asked like that, he will answer like that, and so we will refute his doctrine in that way. And then they hear, the recluse Gautama has come to visit such and such a village or town. And they go to the Blessed One. And the Blessed One instructs, urges, rouses, and gladdens them with a talk on the Dharma. After they've been instructed, urged, roused, and gladdened by the Blessed One with the talk on the Dharma, they don't so much as ask him the question. So how should they refute his doctrine? In actual fact, they become his disciples. And this too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer according to the Dharma about the Blessed One that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. And again, Venerable Sir, I have seen certain learned recluses who were clever, knowledgeable about the doctrines of others, as sharp as hair-splitting marksmen, and they wander about, as it were, demolishing the views of others with their sharp wit. And when they hear that the recluse Gotama will visit such and such a village or town, they formulate a question. And they say, we will go to the recluse Gotama and ask him this question. If he has asked like this, he will answer like this, and so we will refute his doctrine in this way. And if he's asked like that, he will answer like that, and so we will refute his doctrine in that way. And then they hear, the recluse Gotama has come to visit such and such a town or village, and they go to the Blessed One, and the Blessed One instructs them, urges, rouses, and gladdens them with a talk on the Dharma. And after they've been instructed and urged and roused and gladdened by the Blessed One with a talk on the Dharma, they don't so much as ask him the question. So how should they refute his doctrine? In actual fact, those wise recluses become his disciples. This too, Venerable Sir. Wait, one sec. Yeah. In actual fact, they become his disciples. And in actual fact, they ask the Blessed One to allow them to go forth from the home life into homelessness. And the Buddha gives them the going forth. And then, not long after they have thus gone forth, dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute, by realizing for themselves with direct knowledge, they here and now enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the home life into homelessness. And they say thus, we were very nearly lost. We very nearly perished. For formerly, we claimed that we were recluses, though we were not really recluses. We claimed that we were Brahmins, though we were not really Brahmins. We claimed that we were Arhats, though we were not really Arhats. But now we are recluses. Now we're Brahmins. Now we are Arhats. The king said, this too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer according to the Dharma about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One is fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. All right. So we've got wise Kshatriyas, wise Gahapatis, householders, wise Brahmins, and learned Shramanyas, they would be called in the text. A Shramanya is like a recluse. So these different types of people have this big plan. They're gonna play like 40 chess, playing 40 chess with the Buddha. If he goes this way, we're gonna go this way, right? So they have these big plans, and then they all show up and just listen. And they get roused, they get excited about the Dharma, right? And so much so that they forget to ask their questions. Love it. And then all of that is kind of one section, right? Kshatriyas, Brahmins, householders, Shramanyas. And then all of them, it says, all of them, in addition to saying, let us be your disciples, let us be your students, then they also all ask for the going forth, which means they all also renounce and become fully ordained monastics in that way. And then as fully ordained monastics, we get our stock phrase. So this is, we've heard this so many times in so many sutras. But this idea of dwelling alone, withdrawn, diligent, ardent, and resolute, by realizing for themselves with direct knowledge, they here and now enter upon and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from home life into homelessness. And by the way, that, as far as I can tell, at least for the Majjhima Nikāya, that's the specific language of the eradication of the taints, the becoming without outflows, as it's called, anasrava, that idea of having no more outflows or no more taints. And that's being an arhat. So that's the same thing, right? So by the way, I think it's the very first sutra in this collection. No, the second sutra in this collection is the sutra, All the Taints. And it's a really important sutra for understanding this whole collection because it's kind of the model of what this is all about in terms of the taints of sensual desire, these taints of ignorance, these taints of even craving for being. These are the taints that are eradicated in an arhat. So we are told that all of these wise people that come to try to challenge the Buddha, they don't even they don't even ask their questions. They just ask to be disciples. They eventually become monastics, even becoming arhats. So, all right. Last one, number 9. Again, the king says to the Buddha, Venerable Sir, Isidatta and Paranya, my 2 inspectors, they eat my food. They use my carriages. I provide them with a livelihood, and I bring them fame. Yet despite this, they do not so much as honor me, or they do not do such honor to me as they do to the Blessed One. Tricky sentence. So, yet despite all I do for them, they don't do such honor to me as they do to you, the Blessed One. Once, when I had gone out leading an army, and I was testing, excuse me, and I was testing these inspectors, Isidatta and Paranya, I happened to put them in a very cramped quarters. And then these 2 inspectors of mine, Isidatta and Paranya, after spending much of the night in talk on the Dharma, they laid down with their heads in the direction where they had heard that the Blessed One was staying, with their feet sticking out towards me. And I thought, wow, it's wonderful. It's marvelous. These 2 inspectors of mine, Isidatta and Paranya, they eat my food. They use my carriages. I provide them with a livelihood, and I bring them fame. And yet, in spite of this, they are less respectful towards me than they are towards the Blessed One. Surely these 2 dudes, surely these good people perceive successive states of lofty distinction in the Blessed One's dispensation. And this too, Venerable Sir, is why I infer, according to the Dharma, about the Blessed One, that the Blessed One's fully enlightened, the Dharma is well proclaimed by the Blessed One, and the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way. So that one reminds me of that other one where the king was getting interrupted, and he didn't seem too thrilled with the fact that he was getting interrupted all the time. And he's like, but wow, your disciples, they never interrupt you. And here, even though he's like impressed seemingly with Isidatta and Piranya, he's impressed that they're so devoted to the Buddha. He sounds a little miffed, right? Where he's like, huh, I feed them. I let them use my cars. I give them clout and they revere the Buddha. So he said, like, if you put all of that together, like this, the king sounds like he's pissed off, like at his situation where people are interrupting him, his underlings don't respect him. So, but nonetheless, he's impressed by the Buddha. He's impressed by the fact that followers of the Buddha, disciples of the Buddha, hold him in such high regard, right? Even when he's not even there. So. All right, so those are the 9 points. We're coming to the end of the teaching or the end of the sutra. But any questions about those 9 aspects of the Sangha? All right, let's. So this is sort of one of those sutras. It also reminds me of another sutra in this section that we read. It was the sutra where it was the king, and I think he was talking to Ananda. And at the end of the sutra, it's revealed that the Buddha's already passed away. And that, like, the king's like, oh, let's go see the Buddha. And Nanda's like, sorry, but the Buddha's gone. So that was an interesting sutra because the whole sutra was kind of going along. And then right at the end, it's like revealed, nope, the Buddha's gone. Well, this one's sort of similar to that one. I find it interesting that it's in the same collection. So in section 19, after the king has said all of the reasons why he loves the Dharma, he says, again, Venerable Sir, the Blessed One, you are a noble, and I'm a noble. The Blessed One is a Kosalan, like from Kosala, and I'm a Kosalan. The Blessed One is 80 years old, and I'm 80 years old. Since that is so, I think it proper to do such supreme honor to the Blessed One, and to show such friendship. Right. So the king circles all the way back around to the Buddha's question, right? Of why are you giving such honor to this body? Why are you being so friendly to me? And the king says, well, you're a noble, I'm a noble. You're from Kosala, I'm from Kosala, and you're 80 and I'm 80. The reason why this is significant is because within kind of the history of Buddhism, the Buddha dies when he's 80 years old. And if you know the history of the Buddha's last year, the Buddha's last year when he was 80, by all the records, it was kind of gnarly because he got a very bad, seemingly he got a very bad stomach problem from eating something or, some kind of dysentery or something. And so the last months of his life were kind of gnarly from the depictions. And it might actually explain why he was behind a closed door and why there was the whole thing at the beginning of like, well, go up and knock and cough. And like, basically, if he wants to see you, he'll let you in. And then it even sounds like the Buddha is sort of like on his deathbed in that way, the way the king comes in and says, it's me, King Prasanadi, right? So this is all kind of sad in that way, where it's like kind of like, well, it's the Buddha is on his way to parinirvana in that sense. But then we're going to find out more about the king's fate too. So put a pin in that right there, that idea that, hey, we're both 80 years old. That's why I'm being so nice to you. But then the king says, after the king says this about, this is why I'm showing you such reverence and such friendship, the king says, and I love this, even though he's 80 years old, right? And now, venerable sir, I must depart. We are busy and have much to do. Oh, poor guy. Like, dude, take a break, right? I'm sure the Buddha is like, take a break. Because the Buddha then says, yeah, you may go, great king, at your own convenience, at your leisure. And then King Prasanadi of Kosala rose from his seat, and after paying homage to the Blessed One, keeping him on his right, he departed. Then, soon after he had left, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus: Bhikkhus, before rising from his seat and departing, this King Prasanadi uttered monuments to the Dharma. Learn the monuments to the Dharma, bhikkhus. Master the monuments to the Dharma. Remember the monuments to the Dharma. The monuments to the Dharma are beneficial, bhikkhus, and they belong to the fundamentals of the holy life. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. All right. So let's deal with footnote. I guess it's going to be footnote 843 if you happen to have the wisdom edition. So the story, the backstory, remember, it's not in the sutra, but the backstory is that after the king departed, he goes back to Kosala, goes back to his castle, basically, only to find out that his commander-in-chief has given the throne over to King Pasenadi's son. And so King Pasenadi is ousted. King Pasenadi then tries to go to see King Ajatashatru down in Magadha, down in Rajgriha, but apparently he gets there, this is the backstory, he gets there too late and the whole of the city is closed up and he dies alone in the front gates, outside the front gates. It's kind of a gnarly ending, like in that way. And it's especially kind of sad in that way because, you know, this ending, or this kind of the way that this concludes, it reminds me so much of it's called the Samanapala Sutta, the fruits of the homeless life. It's one of the like major sutras that everybody should know. It's in the Digha Nikāya, the long discourses of the Buddha. Again, it's called the Samanapala, the Shramanyapala Sutta, the fruits of being a monastic. And it's a really interesting sutra because what it is it's about King Ajatashatru, actually, who has just basically murdered his father so that he could become the king. And he basically knows that because he did that, he's got a lot of bad karma. And so the sutra is about him going around and talking to different like enlightened people. And basically he wants to know, like, how can I avoid the karmic retribution for all of this? Like, I know that I'm screwed. And he goes like enlightened teacher to enlightened teacher. And he's like, nah, I don't like that. I don't like that answer. Nah, I don't like that answer. I got to do what now? Nah, forget it. So he goes like teacher to teacher, and like a lot of them are about like basically like how in the next life he could like have a better life. And he's like, no, I'm not talking about next life. I'm talking about right now. I can't sleep. In fact, that's how it starts, is he can't sleep. He's so guilty. And so he wants to find somebody that will tell him something that will alleviate him. He finally goes to see the Buddha. And he asks the Buddha, what are the fruits of the homeless life? In other words, what are the benefits of doing this? Like, why are you guys doing this? What's the benefit? And then the Shramanapala Sutta is the Buddha explaining to the king why you would want to do this. And it's a very celebrated sutra because the king doesn't know anything about Dharma, basically. And the king wants to know, like, why are you doing this? And the Buddha says, oh, well, and he lays out point for point the path to kind of awakening in that way. So it's a really good sutra for laying out the complete path so clearly. It's why a lot of people teach from it. But at the end, what happens is the king, the Buddha is basically like, here you go. Like, this is your out. This is your path to a good night's sleep. If you know, and basically the Buddha has extolled the virtues of renunciation. And the king is like, wow, like I totally see why you're the Buddha. I see why what you're teaching is the Dharma. I see it. But I'm busy. He says the exact same thing that King Prasanadi says, but I'm busy. I got a lot to do. And the Buddha says, do what you got to do. And it's a sad sutra because the king, Ajatashatru, in that sutra, he had a chance. And he decided to go back to his busy life and all of that. And so we see kind of echoes of that same thing going on here, but with that added terrible ending of him. Now he's cut off from his immediate family. He's cut off from his extended family, dies alone. Ah. Meanwhile, the whole sutra is basically about how great the community of the Buddha is, right? Because the whole sutra is about the Sangha. This is not about Dharma exactly, right? It's about cohesion, concord, what's the Sangha all about? So, alas, King Prasanadi, he could have had it, but all right. So that kind of is that. And then the last thing that we need to talk about is the title of the sutra, this idea of the monuments to the Dharma. So I said this, or I mentioned it quickly earlier. Last week, when I was reading this, I was just like, okay, let's see what's up with King Prasanadi now, right? And I myself got very excited when I realized that the king was quoting the Dharma, when he was quoting from sutras. I was like, hey, I even have funny notes from before I got to the end of the sutra. I have funny notes. He's quoting sutras. And so I I kind of noticed that. And then when I got to the end, and the Buddha says this thing about, hey, bhikkhus, right before the king left, he uttered monuments to the Dharma. And I got so excited because I was like, oh, I noticed that he was doing that. So I believe that's what that's a reference to, is that that the king is citing Sutra Dharma. Those are the monuments to the Dharma. But the extra thing, the really extra special thing about this idea of a Dhammacetiya, a Dharma stupa. Well, the reason why I was so excited to find this sutra that I had never really read before, and I certainly didn't read it like this, what I didn't know is, so if you are familiar with the Diamond Sutra, the famous Vajra Pranya Paramita Sutra, right? So the Diamond Sutra, or the Vajra Sutra, this is considered like, the beginning of Mahayana Buddhism. This is considered like the beginning of the Bodhisattva path. This is sort of what starts that whole new type of Buddhism. And so in chapter 12 of the Vajra, of the Diamond Sutra, chapter 12 is tiny. It's just a paragraph. And the Buddha says to Subhuti, wherever there is just 4 lines of verse of this Dharma teaching, or wherever just 4 lines of verse of this Dharma teaching are spoken or explained, that place will be like a stupa in the world of devas, humans, and asuras. How much more shall they be remarkably blessed, Subhuti, those who memorize, recite, and master this entire teaching and explain it in detail to others. For in that place dwells a teacher and an honorable disciple. So this chapter 12 is a famous kind of chapter of the Vajra Sutra because it basically says that this sutra is a Dharma stupa. It uses the exact same language of a Dhammacetiya. And so I thought that the idea of a Dhammacetiya, the idea of a Dharma stupa, I thought it was a Mahayana idea. I thought it was only here. I thought it started here. So I was actually kind of surprised to find this old school original Pali Sutta. And it's not that it uses the language of a Dhammacetiya. It's sure. No, but it's actually about what it's talking about. What it's talking about is, oh, and by the way, I should fill in one gap if you don't know this. A chetya, a stupa, a memorial mound. Well, there's another English word that is used to translate both stupa and chetya. And the English word would be a reliquary. And that is because the way it works in the world of Buddhism is that when a teacher dies, when a master dies, their body is cremated, and then you take any shariyas, they're called relic bones, and you take the bones, they're relics, and you take the relics and you put them in a chetya or in a stupa. So it's important to know that a chetya or a stupa, it's where you keep the bones. It's where you keep the relics of an enlightened teacher. Well, it's very interesting that especially in the Mahayana tradition, what they say is that the real relics of the Buddha are the teachings. And therefore, if you know that the teachings are the real reliquary bones of a Buddha, then you can understand a sutra is a stupa. It's a repository for the relics. But what's really wild about this, and now I might just be interpreting, this might just be me, but I actually think it's really interesting that at the very beginning of the sutra, when the king goes in and he's kissing the Buddha's feet, and the Buddha asks, "Why are you doing such honor to this body?" So there's a reference there to the reverence, to the worship or the reverence of the Buddha's body. And then you have this whole kind of interesting, I don't know, where the king is quoting Dharma. And then at the end, the Buddha says that those are all these Dharma reliquaries. I think the reference to the Buddha's body in the beginning is because the whole thing is about like this kind of idea of a chetya in that sense, of a reliquary. And by the way, there are other sutras in the early collections. There's a couple of other sutras. One in particular, it's actually when the Buddha he's getting ready to pass away. And there's a lay person that goes to the Buddha and they're all like, oh, like, I'm gonna miss you. And the Buddha says, are you gonna miss this? You gonna miss this fetid corpse? he says, if you want to remember me, remember the Dharma. So it's already in the early tradition that the real body of the Buddha is not some physical skandha, right? That the real body is the Dharma body, meaning the wisdom in that way. So I think that that idea is being even, that's what's going on in this sutra as well, I think, that they're kind of referencing that. So if you're into the message of the Diamond Sutra and that subtle idea, then you should definitely be paying attention to this little Dhammacetiya Sutta. So, all right, questions, comments, ideas, anything come up for anybody? Noe?
Oh, thank you, Michael. Wow, so much wonderful stuff. The thing that strikes me, if I may, that as a friend, first of all, when it was delightful to hear about that he was able to go to the Buddha. It was really nice. I was like, I want to go to the Buddha. I wish the Buddha lived next door. Guess what? They do. They do. The
Yeah.
Buddha's right here. So
Yeah.
I love that idea of going and at the end saying, my friend, as a friend, we are friends. So the ending of the story is not so sad for me in that the king died alone because we all die alone. And yet he had just figured these beautiful dharmas that he'd memorized them, that he had these dharmas. So to me, it's not such a sad story of him dying alone because we all die alone, but that he held the dharma before he died. That was my observation there, and how blessed is that? You know, why do I practice?
Mm.
Uh, yeah, to have an appropriate response in all things. Yeah. And then someday it'll be this, but hopefully not today, but we'll see. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I hear you, Noe. I hear you. Yeah, I would think the sutras is a beautiful sutra in that way. I think I meant it's sad in that broader way. The king had so many opportunities, you know, he was best friends with the Buddha, right? So just set, that's all I meant, but I hear you though. Yeah. Any other thoughts about? I mean, I really think that, oh yeah, please, Robin.
I I thought it was interesting that at the stupa it was saying in the Diamond Sutra, at that place dwells a teacher and a student, and
Mm,
so it's sort of again sort of referencing like I guess relationship. It's not like there's the teacher, but it was like at that place is a teacher and a student.
hmm. Yeah, for me, the idea of that with the Diamond Sutra in particular is it's really saying that wherever a copy of the Diamond Sutra is, you've got it all. You've got a Buddha. If you're reading it, there's a disciple. You got a Sangha. So you've got it all right there with the Diamond Sutra. So yeah, it's a kind of a beautiful, almost mystical message of the Diamond Sutra in that way. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and I was just going to say that I think all nine of these things, really quickly, all nine of these things I think are so interesting to think about. And so like the first one, I know that I'm still teaching Dharma. I'm still committed to the Dharma in that way. So the king says, "Yeah, I see other traditions. People get involved with it for a little while, but then a few years later, I see that they've left it. They're doing something else. But Dharma, I see the same people at Dharma doors that I've been seeing for years and years and years, and there is something beautiful about the Sangha, that this teaching, this tradition just keeps giving and giving and giving in that way. So I think it is interesting of the Sangha that people stay committed. In fact, I was so moved. I was so moved once. I was in a monastery and I forget the whole circumstances of it, but it was about a monastic and they were talking about their commitment to the Dharma and their commitment to the Sangha. And they said something very interesting, and it was about how they were committed to that life, or that they knew that they had committed to doing that, not just for this life, but for the next lifetime and the next lifetime. And they were fired up at that idea that they had signed up to do this, not just this time. And I was like, again, I was very moved when they said that. And I kind of related to this first one. So, and then again, the idea of like the Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha being so harmonious in that way, right? That it's so much a part of the teaching. Like you take, for example, this strong teaching that they call like non-opposition or like non-confrontationalness. It's like a virtue in Buddhism to basically like not be oppositional, like to be I think contrarian would be the way we might say it, right? And then that the fact that that's a virtue, it spills out into the community. So the number two, that idea that there's so much concord among members of the Sangha. Number three, that it's actually about being joyful, cheerful, looking at each other with kind eyes, right? That everybody in the Sangha is so well disciplined. They don't interrupt each other. There's respect for the teacher, right? And then, of course, all the beautiful idea that people think that they're going to challenge Buddhism, but once they start really looking into Buddhism, they get converted to Buddhism, right? They realize, whoa, this is really something, right? And then number nine is this kind of deep reverence, right? The deep reverence that we all kind of feel in that way towards the three jewels through the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. So I think that those are nine reasons why the Sangha, the Buddhist Sangha in that way is kind of special, or at least the tradition of Buddhism is special. So, Gnome.
I just wanted to thank you. It's such a beautiful sutra, but your explanations have been just super extra lucid tonight. And like, I mean, you and I talked recently about this Dharma, understanding the Dharmakaya, what that means. And tonight I was like, got it, got it. So beautiful. And I think there's something about what you just said that I'm not sure I can verbalize it, but something about like being in why a community of your spiritual friends are so important, because you kind of, there's kind of like no bullshitting you can do. Like there's a way in which like, to some extent in your life, like you meet someone who's like they're difficult, you're like, okay, I'm just not gonna hang out with them kind of thing. But when you're in a community, I mean, including this one, just any kind of spiritual community, you sort of, it's like, okay, this person rubs me the wrong way, but what am I not seeing about them? Or how am I not yet clear on, who this person is, or something like that. You're like forced to really reckon with, instead of just being able to dismiss them, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Noam. Yeah, absolutely, Noam. And that's sort of what I was getting at with the idea of non-opposition as a virtue, but then that plays out in community. And so, like you said, it's like, I think it's so much of a Dharma practitioner's mentality, especially among other practitioners, that if they notice that they're getting annoyed with somebody, the first thing they would do is, what am I missing?
Yeah, right.
Right. Versus, yeah, other situations where it would be like, oh, this person.
Well, and you want to be able to do it with everyone, but that's, this is what practice is, right?
Yes.
Practice it with each other and eventually be able to do it with everyone.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. and just like seated meditation so that we could do it all the time. So, all right, everybody, let's call it a night. Buster's hungry. Buster's here. So it's coming. All right, I'm going to go feed my cat.
Thanks so much.
I will see you all next Sunday. Thank you all for being here. And last sutra in the King's section, in the Ragavaka section. So stay tuned for that next time.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much,
and,
Michael.
Thank you,
I don't
Doug.
know
Thanks,
about you
everybody.
guys, but dying alone or dying surrounded by my beloved community, even if it's just in spirit, sounds much better to me.
Mm.